All right, you may proceed.
This is 1705 Westminster Circle. It's here in Griffin, in Spalding County, in the Country Club. On the outside is a picture of the American dream. It's lovely. Everything is where it should be, in pristine condition, perfectly well cared for. Everything inside should be just so. But if you stepped inside 1705 Westminster Circle, things are not as they appear. Have you ever bought a house? You find the house that's perfect for you on the outside. It looks wonderful. It looks beautiful. It is absolutely everything you ever dreamed it would be. And then an inspector goes in. Make sure that the house is safe. And as the inspector goes in, he finds that the joists are crumbling, that the foundation is cracked, that the black mold has spread throughout the house and is infecting everything, and it's not safe to breathe inside. The house is toxic, and everything shifts. No longer is that house a safe place for you or your family. That's exactly what 1705 Westminster Circle was. And you're going to hear all about that at trial. Because though the picture on the outside was perfect, the interior of this house was built on a foundation of crumbling control. The black mold of shame and humiliation were what held the roof in place in this house. And you're going to hear about one specific bedroom, and how that one bedroom was the epicenter of everything bad in this house. One bedroom so different from every other place in this house that carried guilt, shame, fear, and isolation. You're going to hear about a child. In 2023, he went by the name Evan Schindley. That wasn't his name at birth. Evan was born Haven Gearing in 2013. You're going to hear that he was taken from his birth mother and placed into the foster care system. You're going to hear that he came to live at 1705 Westminster Circle, and that one very specific bedroom. The one very specific bedroom that was different from every other bedroom. And you're going to hear about all the other people that have lived in that family. Now, there are a lot of people in this family, and I'm going to just kind of give you a roadmap by which to listen to the testimony, because it can be a bit confusing about who is who. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw it out for you so you have a little bit of an idea. I'm going to turn this a bit so everyone can see. You have Tyler Schindley, Defendant 1, and Krista Schindley, Defendant 2. They both have their own children prior to the marriage. For purposes of this case, Tyler has Elijah Schindley and has Ethan Tyler Schindley. Okay? Now, Ethan Tyler Schindley is victim number 2 in your indictment. So when you heard counts read related to Krista Schindley against Ethan Tyler Schindley, that's Tyler's biological son. Okay? Krista has a son named Ethan as well. His name is Ethan Washburn. You're going to hear about him later. So there are 2 Ethans in this case. It's very confusing. So again, this is why I'm not trying to be an elementary school teacher. It's just easier for you to be able to see that there are multiple kids. Okay. When they got married, and shortly after they got married, you're going to hear testimony that they wanted to have children together. And so they adopted children together. You're going to hear that they adopted 5 children that were all related, all blood siblings. Okay? We have Evan, and he's victim number 1 in most of the charges that you're going to be considering during this trial. Then there is Alyssa and Elliot. They're twins. They're now 9 years old. They were 7 years old at the time in 2023. Okay? Then there's Amelia and Ariel. They are also twins, and they were 6 at the time. They're now 8. Okay? So lots of E's, 2 Ethans, and we're dealing with Ethan Tyler and Evan. Those are the 2 that you're really going to hear a lot about during this trial. So again, I'm sorry to be elementary, but it's just easier to understand when you can see who they are. So, Evan Schindley, well, Haven Gearing became Evan Schindley, and you're going to hear all about that. You're going to hear that when they initially got custody of Evan, they did not live here in Spalding County. They lived in different counties. They lived in Madison County and then in Henry County. And when they lived in Henry County, you're going to hear from some school teachers and some people who had Evan in their class at Rock Springs Elementary School. And you're going to hear that there were concerns by these teachers. This is when Evan was still a foster child with the Schindleys. And they were concerned that Evan wasn't getting enough food. He was constantly upset, he was constantly hungry, and he complained about constantly being hungry. You're also going to hear that Evan had behavior issues. The state is never going to hide that from you. You need to be aware of that going in. You're also going to hear that those behavior issues were never hidden from the Schindleys. Evan, while he was in kindergarten and 1st grade, began to develop some very specific behaviors related to food and constantly trying to get food. You're going to hear about the defendant's responses to his constant asking for food and how they dealt with that. You're going to hear testimony related to conversations with the defendants about food and about Evan's concern about food and the fact that he's always hungry and the instructions that were given to the school in order to handle that. You're also going to hear during the course of this trial that the Schindleys were not happy with how the school handled that, and specifically that defects became involved, that it slowed down the adoption process, and that Evan was eventually pulled from the school. And then, the thing that wrecked everyone's lives, COVID. And Evan completely falls off the radar. No longer is the school keeping track. You're going to hear about how people in the school never heard of Evan again. He was gone. And shortly thereafter, in October of 2020, the defendants moved here to Griffin, to 1705 Westminster Circle, to this house that becomes the epicenter of this case. You're going to hear that Evan's concerns with food do not stop. They get worse. Evan goes from being a healthy child to a child who weighs 37 pounds at 10 years old. 37 pounds. You're going to hear that when he is found walking down the street alone, barefoot, in size 5T clothing that hangs off of his little frame, that he's hungry, and that all he asks is to be fed and to not have to go back home. You're going to see what Evan looked like. There's going to be video. You're going to be able to see his frame. You're going to see photographs through the course of this case that show that he's covered from the top of his head to the soles of his feet in injuries. You're going to hear how he got those injuries. I want to go ahead and tell you, you are not likely to hear from Evan. You are going to hear what happened in that house because you're going to hear from Alyssa, Elliot, Amelia, and Ariel. Evan can't be here. You're going to hear all about what that singular room in in 1705 Westminster Circle held for Evan Schindley, what his life was like. You're going to hear how the defendants violated law after law, both moral law as well as the rules that are set forth by the state of Georgia, and how they did it intentionally. Because you're going to hear that they never wanted Evan, and they never hid it. They told person after person that they did not want Evan. Evan was their sacrificial lamb because they wanted the twins. But Evan was the cost. Evan was the cost of adopting the twins. But you're going to hear that the person who paid the cost was not Tyler Schindley, and was not Krista Schindley, but was Evan himself. You're going to hear about Evan's life. You're going to hear about the cruel and malicious things that were done to him because they didn't want him, because he was difficult, because they couldn't control him no matter how hard they tried. You're going to hear how the perfect facade of 1705 Westminster Circle is just that, a facade. Because the defendants didn't need anything to take care of Evan. They chose not to. They chose not to deal with him, to lock him in that one room, put him out of sight, out of mind. And if Evan died, so the better. No more problem.